Grandpa's hand was already cold when the lawyer slid the envelope across the table. And inside it was a check made out to me for exactly $100,000, along with a single handwritten line on the attached letter that read, "For the one who actually showed up." My brother read those words over my shoulder, and before I even had time to process what they meant, his hand connected with my face so hard my ears rang, and the check fluttered to the floor between us like it had just witnessed a murder. Stay with me, because what happened in the 30 seconds after that slap, not weeks later, not after some slow burn investigation, but right there in that lawyer's office, is the part of this story that still doesn't feel real to me, even though I lived every second of it. If you've ever been punished for being the one who actually did the work while someone else just expected the reward, subscribe right now because this story is going to feel like vindication. I want to take you back before the slap, before the check, before any of it, because you need to understand exactly what showed up meant in that letter, and why my brother's reaction told you everything you needed to know about the two of us, without either of us saying another word. Grandpa got sick 4 years before he died, slow, cruel, the kind of decline that takes a sharp, funny, stubborn man and turns him, piece by piece, into someone who needs help remembering which day it is. I was 26 when it started. My brother was 29. We were both single, both without kids, both on paper equally available to help. Only one of us actually did. For 4 years I drove 40 minutes each way, 3 or 4 times a week to sit with Grandpa, to take him to appointments, to manage his medications when his memory started slipping, to sit with him through nights. When the confusion got bad enough that he didn't know which decade he was living in, my brother visited on holidays. He called it being respectful of boundaries. He called it not smothering the guy. He called it a dozen different things that all amounted to the same simple truth. He didn't want to do it, and he trusted that I would. So he never had to feel guilty about choosing not to. I didn't do it for a reward. I want to be completely honest about that, because it matters for what comes next. I did it because he was my grandfather, and because somewhere in those long, quiet evenings helping him remember names and faces, I fell in love with who he still was underneath the fog, in a way my brother never gave himself the chance to. If you've ever been the one who shows up while someone else just shows up for the photos, comment "I know that" chair below, because you already understand the weight I carried into that lawyer's office 4 years later. The day Grandpa's will was finally read, my brother, Trevor, had a very specific number in his head long before that meeting, and it wasn't subtle about it. He'd been telling people for months, cousins, family, friends, even my own mother, that Grandpa was obviously going to split everything 50-50, because that's how inheritance works, because that's how it's supposed to work, because in Trevor's mind, blood alone had always been enough to earn equal standing, regardless of what you actually did with that blood relationship, while the person was still alive to need you. He'd already mentally spent his half before we even sat down at that table. He'd mentioned a truck. He'd mentioned a down payment on a condo. He talked about it the way you talk about money that's already yours. Money you're just waiting for the paperwork to catch up to. So when the lawyer read the will aloud, the house split evenly between us. The savings account split evenly, but a separate, specific check for $100,000, drawn from a private account Grandpa had quietly built over those same 4 years, made out solely to me with that one devastating handwritten line attached. I watched my brother's face do something I had genuinely never seen it do before. Not sadness, not even real grief, just pure naked entitlement curdling into rage in real time. Right there in front of the lawyer, right there in front of Grandpa's still warm absence in the room, for the one who actually showed up. 6 words. That's all it took to detonate 29 years of Trevor believing that being the older brother, being the favorite at family barbecues, being the one who always had a funnier story and an easier laugh, was its own kind of currency that never needed to be backed up by anything real. He stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. He called me a manipulator. He said I'd guilted Grandpa into rewriting things, like 4 years of overnight hospital, visits and medication, schedules with some elaborate con. I'd run on a dying man instead of just love, expressed the only way that actually matters, through time, through presence, through showing up when it was inconvenient and exhausting and entirely unglamorous. And then he slapped me. I want to slow down here because I think this is the part you came for. and I owe you the full truth of it. The sound was sharper than I expected. My vision actually went white at the edges for a second. The lawyer, a quiet, composed older man named Mr. Aldrich, who had clearly seen a lot of families fall apart across that exact table, didn't even flinch with surprise, and he simply reached for the phone on his desk with the calm, practiced motion of a man who had been mentally preparing for exactly this possibility. The entire meeting. If you're feeling that mix of shock and grim satisfaction right now, drop a comment with the word finally, because what happened in the next 60 seconds is the part that turned this from a tragedy into something else entirely. Mr. Aldrich didn't call security. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply said, in the flattest, most devastating tone I've ever heard a person use, Mr. Whitfield, I should mention, this meeting has been recorded per your grandfather's explicit instruction for legal protection purposes regarding the estate. Trevor's face went the color of old paper. Grandpa, it turned out, sharp even through the fog of his illness and his more lucid stretches, had anticipated exactly this outcome. He told Mr. Aldrich months before he died that he suspected Trevor might react badly, might even contest the will, and he wanted any confrontation in that office documented, cleanly, undeniably, specifically so that if Trevor ever tried to challenge the inheritance split in court, there would be no ambiguity about who he really was underneath the charm. That recording did more than just capture a slap. It captured Trevor in his own voice, admitting on record that he hadn't visited Grandpa in over 8 months before he died, while trying to argue he deserved equal inheritance on the basis of being just as much family. It captured him, calling 4 years of caregiving performative. It captured the exact moment his mask slipped all the way off, in a room he thought was private, in front of a man whose only job in that moment was to quietly press record and let Trevor's own entitlement do the rest of the work for him. I didn't press charges over the slap, and I want to explain why. Because I think it matters more than the inheritance itself. I didn't need to. The recording, combined with the will's own language, meant Trevor's threat to contest the estate evaporated within a week. Once his own lawyer reviewed the footage and quietly advised him that pursuing it would only expose him to more scrutiny, not less. He got his half of the house and the savings, exactly as Grandpa intended, because Grandpa was never trying to punish him out of spite. He was simply, finally telling the truth about who had earned what. In the one form of communication, Trevor couldn't argue his way around a number on a page, paired with 6 words that said everything Grandpa had never managed to say to either of us, while he could still find the words on his own. If you think this story ends with some explosive, satisfying revenge plot, I need to be honest with you, because real endings are quieter and stranger than that. Trevor and I don't talk much anymore, not because of some dramatic falling out after that day, but because the slap and everything underneath it finally said out loud what 4 years of unequal showing up had already been saying silently the whole time. I didn't lose a brother that day in the lawyer's office. I think, if I'm honest, I'd already lost him years earlier, somewhere around the 40th time. I drove to Grandpa's house alone while Trevor posted vacation photos from somewhere warm and easy. What I gained instead was something harder to put a price on, even though, ironically, it came with a very specific price attached to it, the absolute, undeniable knowledge that showing up, quietly, consistently, without an audience, without applause, is its own kind of inheritance, one that nobody can slap out of your hands, one that no entitled sibling can argue you out of after the fact. Because it was never about the money to begin with. It was about who Grandpa knew. In his clearest moments, he could actually count on, and in the end, that's the only inheritance that ever really mattered. If this story hit something real in you, if you've ever been the one who showed up while someone else just assumed they'd be rewarded for existing, tell me in the comments which moment landed hardest. The handwritten line, the slap, or the recording nobody saw coming. I read every single comment, and they shape exactly which story I tell next. Subscribe now if you want more raw, real stories about the quiet wars inside families. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next reveal, and stay close, because the next story I'm bringing you is even more unforgettable than this one.